All right, what's going on, everybody? So here's chapter 13. Chapter 13 is the first chapter in Unit 5. Unit 5 is going to take us from 1844 to 1877. So the best way to think about this unit is the road to the Civil War, then the Civil War, and then Reconstruction, which is, for those of you who are not familiar, the aftermath of the Civil War and kind of everything that comes after. So the unit goes from 1844 to 1877. If you recall, chapter 10, which is the last chapter we talked about politics, ended in 1844. This is kind of picking up where that one left off. It's a lot of it is about politics. This chapter specifically, chapter 13, is a lot about politics. So chapter 13 called Expansion, War, and Sectional Crisis. So it takes us from 1844, which is a presidential election, to 1860, which is a monumentally important presidential election. 1860 is going to be the election of Abraham Lincoln. And then following that, 1861 is going to be the beginning of the Civil War, which will obviously be another chapter. But that's the way to think about this unit. Unit 5 is the road to the Civil War, the lead up to the Civil War, the causes of the Civil War, then the actual Civil War itself, and then Reconstruction, which is kind of the fallout from the Civil War and how we kind of try to put our country back together afterwards. So this chapter right here, chapter 13, takes us from 1844 to 1860. So it doesn't get us into the Civil War yet, but it's going to tiptoe us right up to the doorstep to the Civil War, knock on the door, and the next chapter we'll get right in there. So chapter 13, Expansion, War, and Sectional Crisis. So I told you at some point previously, I don't remember when or where or what chapter it was, but oftentimes people will tell you that the Civil War, well, first of all, some people will tell you that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. Those people are either stupid or liars. Don't believe them. But it wasn't just about slavery. It was about slavery plus Western expansion. That's the lethal combination. Slavery has existed in the United States since before there was a United States. If slavery was going to cause a civil war by itself, it would have happened already. It's the lethal combination of slavery plus Western expansion, right? We talked about this when we talked about the Missouri Compromise. As we add huge chunks of land as we move west, and that's what a lot of this chapter is going to focus on, just adding huge chunks of land, right? Because we went from the original 13 colonies to all the way from coast to coast in a relatively short period of time. We'll talk about that more. But every time we add a huge chunk of land, eventually people will move into that land. As people move into that land will be able to qualify for statehood. In every state that applies, the first kind of most pressing question is going to be, during this time period, during kind of the first half of the 1800s, are you going to be a slave state or are you going to be a free state? Half the country is really going to be a slave state, and half the country is really going to be a free state. And whichever one you claim that you want to be when you apply for statehood as either slave or free, half of the country will celebrate, half of the country will be irate, and it will cause this rift between North and South, this divide between North and South, to grow greater and greater and become more and more toxic. So the Civil War doesn't start because of just slavery. It's slavery plus Western expansion. Okay, so just to reiterate, as we get started, if anybody tries to convince you that the Civil War is not about slavery, they are stupid or a liar. Don't believe them. But it is also not just about slavery plus Western expansion, okay? And the argument over whether or not we're going to allow states to come in as free or slaves. So that's what we're looking at in chapter 13, because this is walking us right up to the Civil War. So this is the poisoning of the well. This is the thing that's going to rip our country apart once and for all. Again, I'll remind you that we've been talking about this kind of issue, North-South issue, since basically from the beginning, right? That Jamestown was settled in one very specific way, and the entire kind of all the southern colonies that kind of grew out of there, from Virginia all the way south down to Georgia, really were modeled after kind of what was first founded at Jamestown, which was an agriculturally based, profit-driven, profit-focused, dependent on slave labor type of society. And then further up north, that was in 1607 when Jamestown was founded. And further up north in 1620, 1621, Plymouth is founded. And that starts a whole separate, specific kind of culture, right? One that was not, people who came here were not coming for profit. They were coming here for their religious values and their cultural values, and they established a society that was focused on trying to create a city upon a hill, this model civilization and society for the rest of the world to kind of look up to. And they had their own values and their own way of doing things, their own society. So much of the history of America, at least up until the Civil War, is this idea that we are trying to force two completely different societies to coexist, right? It almost destroyed our country at the very beginning when we were trying to figure out what kind of country we wanted to be after the Civil War, with the Articles of Confederation and then the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and then all the fights between the Federalists versus the Republicans. Much of that really actually just boils down to North versus South, two fundamentally different ideas of what America is supposed to be. And then we saw that continue on through the first part of the 1800s, and certainly it's going to continue on here, right? These two different societies trying to coexist, and eventually it's going to prove unsuccessful, right? Because we're going to enter into a civil war that's going to cause the loss of over 600,000 lives. But we're not quite there yet. That's next chapter. So this is all the stuff that really gets us there. Expansion, war, not the Civil War, a different war, and sectional crisis. All right, let's jump into it. Part 1, manifest destiny, North and South. So we're talking about manifest destiny. We're talking about Western expansion, right? But it's not just Western expansion. It's this fundamental idea and belief that by Americans that God wants us to take over the entire North American continent, that it is preordained by God for us to take over all the North American continent. And it's not just our right to take that land, it's actually our duty and our responsibility to take that land. It comes from this very, how would you say it? Kind of this very superior, right? Superior way of thinking about other people, right? It's built into white superiority. Well, the rest of the North American continent is controlled by who? Native Americans and Mexicans, the country of Mexico, right? And there's this general belief that those two groups of people, the land doesn't actually belong to them because they're not using it correctly and they're not, doing the things they're supposed to do in the land. And there's this belief that God wants us to go and take all of this land, that all this, it's not greedy of us to take it, it's that God wants us to. Now, of course, we all know that's just a BS cover. I mean, maybe some people genuinely believe that's a BS cover for greed and for going and taking all of this land, but that's the idea behind it. So manifest destiny, okay? This is what the United States looks like in the year 1800, when I guess what I should say, when the last unit started. Remember, the last unit went from 1800 to 1860. So this is what the United States looks like in 1800. It basically looks the same as it did in 1783. In 1783, when we won the Revolutionary War. In 1783, when the Treaty of Paris was signed and Great Britain said, fine, you want to be your own country, you could be your own country, go for it, right? And this is basically what the United States looked like. We controlled the land from the Atlantic to the Mississippi, everything in between. We did not control Florida. Canada, we did not control, so everything really up to the Great Lakes. So this is essentially what baby America looked like, right? Of course, we've added a couple of states, whatever. We've filled in this area a little bit as far as people and governing structures or whatever. But from our size, we have not grown beyond what the birth, right? So in 1783, little baby America was born. And in 1800, our actual size has not changed at all from being little baby America. But if you look at 1800 to 1853, we go from baby America to full-grown America. This is what the United States looks like today, other than Alaska and Hawaii, right? Everything is fully filled in. This is exactly what America looks like. So in a matter of 5 decades, we go from baby America to full-grown America. So this is a monumental expansion. I know I'm hearkening back to some of the things I used last unit, but this idea of this time period being America's childhood, and I've talked to you before about these monumental growth spurts that America is going to go through, right? So again, if in, sorry, borrowing from Unit 4, but if you met someone when they were 2 years old and then didn't see them again until they were 11, they would in no way physically look any way like they did the last time you saw them. I mean, a 2-year-old and an 11-year-old, same person, obviously completely different in every imaginable way. That's America. 1800 is when we were 2, 1853 is when we are 11. And really, you could even say beyond that, because again, we are fully grown America. baby America, and that's in the span of one human life, like actual person. That's 50 years, right? You could have been born in America in let's say 1799, and then died in 1854, and that would only be a 55-year lifespan. A lot of people would say, "Wow, that guy died young," and you would have seen the full growth of America in your lifespan, right? So a lot of growth in a very short amount of time, and it comes in bits, it comes in chunks, right? So you see right here, excuse me, this is original baby America, 1783, right? Then we talked about 1803, the Louisiana Purchase, doubling the size of the United States. This big old chunk of land is going to be added. That's when Thomas Jefferson was president, and they kind of accidentally backed into buying it. Remember, they just wanted to buy New Orleans, right? And then Napoleon was like, "Why don't you buy all this?" And they were like, "All right." We will see. We have not gotten there yet. We've told the beginning of the story. Well, I'm sorry, before we get there, we will purchase Florida from, it says from Britain here. So I guess that's accurate. I thought we bought it from Spain, but that's kind of irrelevant. We bought Florida at some point in 1821, so we added that. In 1845, we will add Texas. We haven't gotten there yet. Remember last chapter, we told the first half of the story about Texas. That was like the 1830s, about how kind of King Cotton and this cotton belt really spread us westward. This is the whole cotton region right here down in the south, and we burst into Texas. And that wasn't America, that was Americans who went and settled in North Mexico and then got into that skirmish with Mexico that led to Texas becoming its own independent republic for a hot minute. Well, that's where we left off, Texas's own independent republic. But in this chapter, we will see Texas be added in 1845. We will work out some diplomatic issues with Great Britain, which will give us the Oregon Territory in 1846. In 1848, we will win a war with Mexico, in which we will add this huge chunk of land, including, of course, where we all are right now, right here in the Bay Area. This includes California and everything else. We will buy some more land from Mexico in 1853, and that's basically going to bring us to modern day America, right? 5 or 6 chunks, boom, 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 5 or 6 bites at the apple, and we're full-grown America. Again, very rapid expansion, very quickly. And all of this is driven by, or at least kind of understood through, this idea of manifest destiny. It's not just our right to take all of this land, it's our duty to take all of this land. God wants us to have it. So that's manifest destiny, right? And that's kind of one of the ideas driving this whole thing. That's kind of the term that kind of, is kind of used as a blanket term for all this westward expansion. So this is a very famous painting, which if we were in class, which we are not, we would analyze and look at it and then ask you to talk about the things that you noticed about it. So take a moment and pause the tape and notice things. Pause the tape. What is this, like 1998? Pause the video and think about what things you noticed. I'll stop, you pause. Okay, now that you've unpaused it, I'm sure you noticed that this half of the painting is very dark, this half of the painting is very light. The central figure is this angelic-like feature who maybe looks like Lady Liberty. She's holding a book in her hand, which could represent knowledge. It could be the Bible. It could represent Christianity. She's holding this wire in her hand, which connects to these kind of whatever they are, communication wires, telegraph wires, something like that. You see behind her, it looks like civilization. There's a city back there. There's a train right here. There's trade happening back here. There's another train right here. There's agriculture right here. In front of her is wilderness, right? It's Native Americans, it's buffaloes, it's mountains, right? It's savagery, whatever. So the whole idea behind this painting, of course, is that we are expanding westward. This woman is driving us where Lady Liberty, this angelic-like figure is bringing knowledge, Christianity, technology with her, and everything behind her that has already experienced such things is light and well organized and beautiful. And everything in front of her is going to be blessed with these things. So this fundamentally, this image captures the idea of manifest destiny, right? This idea that we will come and bring the light, the awareness, the goodness, the knowledge of what civilization is supposed to be to all of these dark territories, which are now currently kind of wasting away under Native American control, under Mexican control, so on and so forth. The first time the term manifest destiny was used was in 1845 in this quote right here from a writer named John L. O'Sullivan, in which he said, "It is our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by the providence, notice the capital P, the providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. The providence, capital P, means God. It is our continent given to us by God to spread freedom and knowledge and all the things that America is awesome about. Okay, so this is Manifest Destiny right here in one painting, the whole idea of it. Okay, here's the same image I already showed you. If we were in class, I'd play this video for you. It is as always, an amazing Schoolhouse Rock video. It's called Elbow Room. I suggest you pause this tape. I'll say tape again. This video, open up another tab, go to YouTube and type in Schoolhouse Rock Elbow Room. Take 3.5 minutes, watch it, enjoy it in all of its majesty. It's a very enjoyable way to understand Manifest Destiny. And then come back and then listen to me talk about it some more. So go ahead, watch that, and then come on back. Welcome back. Okay. So yeah, Elbow Room, great song. Elbow Room, Elbow Room. Got to get some elbow room. You just watched it. You saw it. I know you watched it. Good job. I'm proud of you. Okay. So let's talk about what this westward expansion actually looks like. Now, many of you played the game Oregon Trail when you're in elementary school. Those of you who didn't, I'm sorry, your childhood sucked, because if you didn't play Oregon Trail, you completely wasted your childhood. And again, when you're done with this lecture, you can play it online for free. It's a lot of fun. And also, if we were in class, we would have played it in class. So many things we're missing out on. COVID. Anyway, so the actual literal Oregon Trail was one of a handful of trails that people took westward, because one of the things that's going to happen is that people have been kind of slowly but surely migrating westward, right? And finding these areas to settle where there's different types of resources, maybe agriculture. And we know that we're kind of on the edge here, right? But we know that up here in this Great Lakes region, that's really been popping off because of the transportation revolution that brought roads and canals out here. And then down here in this area, we know the agriculture is doing really well because the Mississippi River allows you to bring goods down to the Gulf of Mexico, and that people kind of generally settled here. But you notice there is a kind of, or not you notice, but I'll point out to you, there's kind of a cold, hard line right here where people stop moving westward, because you run into something. You can see right here, this big thing where it looks like someone spilled some coffee or something. It's called the Great Plains. We've talked about the Great Plains before, but I'll remind you. The Great Plains are basically this giant flat lawn with almost no natural resources whatsoever. So as we slowly but surely migrate westward, we hit the Great Plains and we're like, red light. Nobody's interested in any of this. This is gross. Don't want it. Nothing to do here. So we'll just blow past the Great Plains. When you get to the other side of the Great Plains, you hit a big old rocky ass mountain range called the Rocky Mountains. It's cold, it's rocky, no real resources there that we're aware of yet. Later on we will. So we're going to blow past the Rocky Mountains. Then we're going to get to a place called the Great Basin, which is kind of like a smaller Great Plains. Then we're going to get to the Sierra Nevadas, which is kind of like a smaller Rocky Mountains, which of course we all know is dope because that's where we go on vacation every summer in Tahoe and Yosemite and stuff like that. But it's not really a place that they want to settle. But once you get past that, now you're in California. And as we all know, California knows how to party. So people are just skipping over this huge kind of 1/3 of the North American continent because there's no real reason to settle there. And they're going and they're either coming up to Oregon, to the Willamette Valley, which is where Portland is today. A lot of amazing, wonderful resources to settle, grow, to establish agriculture, grow a bunch of crops, so on and so forth, dropping down into the San Joaquin Valley here in California, which of course we know produces a lot of stuff. And then of course these coastal areas. So out here on the West Coast, tons of great resources, great places to settle, but all the stuff in the middle, people are just skipping over. So the Oregon Trail, all these trails basically pop off generally from Independence, Missouri. And then the Oregon Trail would take you up through the Great Plains, over the Rockies, et cetera, et cetera. And then you could either cut off here and go down towards California or continue on. Now, it's called the Oregon Trail, but the reality is actually most of the people who went on the Oregon Trail cut off and went down to California. So you have those trails, and then down here you have the Santa Fe Trail, which also takes you down to Southern California. So in total, 65,000 people traveled along the Oregon Trail. 185,000 people ended up in California. I'm sorry, that's not the total number of people. The total number of people who journeyed on the Oregon Trail, corrected myself, by 1860 is 250,000. Of those 250,000, 65,000 ended up in Oregon, 185 ended up in California, and 34,000 died before they made it. Now, if you played this game when you were a kid, that statistic does not surprise you because everybody is always dying in that game all the time, right? And that was to reflect reality. You got bit by a snake, you got malaria, you drowned in the river, Native Americans attacked you, whatever it was, right? But a lot of people didn't make it across this journey. It was a brutal, harsh, vicious journey, and a lot of people didn't make it across, but a lot of people did. And we find ourselves in this place now where this kind of westward expansion, this desire to go out to these areas and settle there, is creating problems, or I guess new, depending on how you look at it, opportunities or problems similar to what happened when all those cotton growers just jammed into Texas. Oregon is not technically part of the United States at this point. California is part of Mexico. So let's kind of break it down. The Oregon Territory, which included Oregon, Washington, and parts of what is modern day British Columbia, was this whole area where the United States and Great Britain had said, we'll make a deal. Anybody who wants to settle in this area can settle in this area. But it's not part of the United States, but we're just people are settling there. California, a bunch of people are settling there, but it's still part of Mexico, just like Texas was. So you have a whole bunch of Americans settling in these areas, starting with Texas, then going to Oregon, then going to California, where it wasn't even part of the United States. But manifest destiny tells us that according to God, it will at some point be part of the United States. God wants us to go and settle those areas, and eventually we'll just, as we settle them, eventually they'll be added to the United States. And it's precisely what's going to happen. We're going to walk through that right now. Okay, so the election of 1844 is all about Western expansion. That's the deal. That's the whole ticket, right? So where we left off was the election of 1840. Now you may remember the election of 1840 was the biggest turnout in American history. 80% turned out. This is the last election we talked about. That was the one where William Henry Harrison was kind of chosen. So, okay, rewind. We're in the second party system at this point, right? We are now at the Democrats, which was the party started by Jackson in 1828, versus the Whigs, which is kind of the anti-Jackson party, which was started in 1832. You remember Andrew Jackson lost the election of 1824, even though he won, but it got stolen from him, right? Then he came back in 1828 and said, no, I'm running again. I'm going to win this time, and I'm starting a brand new political party. That's the Democrats. So he started the Democrats in 28, and he won. And he won again in 32, but now the opposition party came up and said, we're the Whigs, right? And Jackson and the Democrats are basically carrying on the traditions and the ideas of the old Jeffersonians, right? Small government, pro-agriculture, more of a Southern support system, anti-elite, right? All that other stuff. That's the Jacksonian party. That's the Democrats, the old Jeffersonians. The Whig Party is basically the old Federalists, the old Hamiltonians, the old John Quincy Adams party, right? But now they call themselves the Whigs, and they have their support system mostly in the northeastern part of the United States. They are pro-strong government, pro-government being very involved in the economy, pro a manufacturing-based economy, and pro the elites running the country. So that's the two parties, the Whigs and the Democrats. So remember, in 28, Jackson's going to win, because Jackson's the common man, the champion of the common man. And he basically won in 24, but it got stolen from him. He'll win in 28. He'll win in 32. His hand-picked successor, Martin Van Buren, will win in 36. But the economy is going to tank because Jackson killed the bank. Ooh, that rhymed. That was fun. Martin Van Buren is not beloved by the people. He's an elitist from New York, even though he's a Democrat. So in the election of 1840, you have Martin Van Buren, who's a Democrat, the party of the common man, the party of Jackson, but he's an elitist from New York. And then the Whigs run William Henry Harrison. Even though the Whigs are the elitist party, they kind of tried to replicate the whole Jackson thing. And William Henry Harrison was the war hero from the War of 1812 and supposedly born in a log cabin and common man. So William Henry Harrison won that election, but then died of pneumonia a month later. So that was the election of 1840. That was where we left it off. His vice president, John Tyler, became president, and he was basically not even really a Whig. And by the time his presidency was done, no one wanted anything to do with it anymore because his own party, which was theoretically the Whig party, but he was super pro-slavery, didn't want anything to do with him anymore. So now we're in 1844. The Democrats are going to run a dude named James Polk, and they call him Young Hickory. Now, you may remember that John Quincy Adams, not John Quincy Adams, that Andrew Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory. So they call James Polk Young Hickory because he's from Tennessee, just like Jackson was. And everybody says, man, this guy's the second coming of Jackson. Just like Jackson was the second coming of Jefferson, Polk is the second coming of Jackson. So Polk supports and promotes all of the same things that Jackson did, right? He's all about small government. He's all about states' rights, so on and so forth. But the big thing about Polk, too, is that he is a hardcore expansionist. He's like, yo, that last president didn't want to have anything to do with Texas. We're going to annex Texas. We have this weird deal about Oregon with Great Britain. We're going to figure all that out, and we're going to annex Oregon. California, we got a bunch of Americans moving out there. We're going to get California too. So when he ran for president, he said, we're going to get all this stuff. He was like an unabashed, we're going for it. We're going to get it. Manifest destiny. If you could take the whole concept of manifest destiny and just shove it into an individual human being, it would be James K. Polk. He is the personification of Western expansion and manifest destiny. So he's going for it, and he has a lot of support for that, but also because he's kind of like Jackson's protege, right? He's the second coming of Jackson. Well, our old friend Henry Clay is running against him for the Whig Party. Remember, Henry Clay was the dude that ran in 1824 and lost. This was going to run for president like 6 times and lose every time. But anyway, he ran in 1824, got his butt whooped, but then he handpicked John Quincy Adams to be the president and became the Secretary of State under Adams. It was Adams and Clay that created the American system. Then Jackson defeated them, destroyed the American system. So now Henry Clay is back at it again, running for the Whig Party against Jackson's protege, and he will lose. But this time it's going to be a pretty close election. And really one of the things that kills Clay is he actually kind of flip-flops on Texas annexation, right? So first of all, his big thing is running on the American system. He's like, yo, remember when I created the American system, all the roads and canals and all that other stuff with John Quincy Adams? We got to bring that back. We got to bring back the high tariffs. We got to bring back the American system. So he's basically running on, he's running on Alexander Hamilton's economic plan, which he and John Quincy Adams brought back to life in the 1820s. Now he's trying to bring back to life again in the 1840s, right? But he flip-flopped on the Texas thing. At first, he was like, no, we shouldn't annex Texas. And then he kind of saw Polk going hard for it and saw that it was kind of popular, then changed his mind and said, oh, we should annex Texas. And everybody was kind of like, what? Like, we don't really know what you stand for. So Polk is very clearly, unabashedly, not equivocating. I am all about, we're going to get Texas, we're going to get Oregon, we're going to get California. That's what we're going to do if you elect me president. And Clay was kind of like, all right. Remember the roads and canals? So everybody's like, Polk, you're a guy, we're going to vote for you. So James K. Polk will be elected president of the United States in 1844. And this election is all about Western expansion, all about manifest destiny. That's the deal. That's kind of the main focus here, okay? And he follows through on his promises. Just like he said he was going to do during his campaign, he decides he is going to annex Texas. So remember, Mexico still plans on coming back and taking Texas. It hasn't yet. Texas has been sitting out there for about a decade, claiming that it's its own independent republic, even though Mexico never acknowledges it. But now the United States is going to be like, we are taking Texas, we're annexing it. Is it going to become the 28th state of the 28th state of the United States? Now, again, this is a risky move because one, you're pissing off Mexico and potentially going to war with them, but two, you're also pissing off the northern states who are not interested in adding a whole nother slave state. But Polk said, this is what I'm going to do, and he does it. He followed through on it. Doesn't care if it pisses off the Mexicans, doesn't care if it pisses off the northern states. He's doing it, he's going for it. By the way, quick side note, feel free to fast forward through this part if you don't like random trivia. If you've ever been to a Six Flags amusement park, and you may or may not know this already, so I apologize if you already do. The reason it's called Six Flags is because it was created, the first Six Flags amusement park was created in Texas, and it's because Texas has flown under 6 different flags throughout its history. First, the Spanish flag. Second, the Mexican flag. Third, the Republic of Texas. Fourth, the United States of America. Oh, wait, now I'm forgetting one. Oh, France was in there 1 point. Haha, I almost forgot France. Okay, so first was Spain, then was France, then it went back to Spain, but we're not going to count that again. Then Mexico became independent. Then it was the Republic of Texas. Then it was the United States of America. Then it was the Confederacy. And then back to the United States. That's Six Flags. That's why Six Flags is called Six Flags, because it came from Texas, and Texas is flown under Six Flags. Fun, right? See, you guys didn't think this lecture would be fun. Anyway, so now Texas is part of the United States. Polk came through on his promise. Expansion, addition. This is the deal. That's what we're doing. And this brings us to part 2, in which us pissing off Mexico turns out to have some actual real life consequences, which will end up being a good thing for us. It's kind of complicated. So part 2 is called War, Expansion, and Slavery. All right, here we go. So the Mexican-American War. There will later be a Spanish-American War, and people often get them confused, even though Mexico and Spain are different countries in different hemispheres. This is the Mexican-American War. So here's the deal. Polk said from the beginning, I will get us California. If you elect me for president, I'm going to get us California. So once the United States annexes Texas, Mexico's already mad at us. So Polk sends some people down to Mexico to say, hey, man, let's negotiate. We'll tell you what, we want to buy all of this land from you. Okay, you're not really using it. This land is pretty much unoccupied. All your population is down here. We just took a large chunk of it from you. Sorry that made you mad, but like, we'll offer you, I can't remember what it was, like $30 million, some large chunk of money at that time to buy all this land from you. And Mexico's like, yeah, that land's not for sale. We're not selling it to you. And America's like, you really should buy it from us. And Mexico's like, no, we're not buying it from you. So like, buzz off, sucker, right? So America's like, okay. So here is Texas, right here. Now, there's a disputed border in between the United States and Mexico, right? And part of the whole, we want to buy all this land from you was, hey, we got this disputed border. We'll buy the land that's in dispute and the rest of it. So here's the deal. There's a river right here called the Rio Grande, which means big river. And there's a river right here called Nueces, which means nuts. Neither of which are relevant or important, but you know, throw some Spanish in there for you. The United States believes that the Rio Grande is its southern border, and Mexico believes the Nueces River is its northern border, which means that everything in between those rivers is disputed. America thinks it's part of the United States. Mexico thinks it's part of Mexico. So we say, hey, man, we'll buy all that land from you and all this other stuff that you're not really using. Mexico says, nah, get the hell out of here. Like, you already stole Texas from us, blah, 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 blah. So since they refuse to buy it from us, and Polk is dead set on making sure that we get it, he basically tells, and there's a whole bunch of military personnel down here in the American Army right here at the border. There's a bunch of Mexican military right here at the border. And he tells the American military, hey, just start running drills in this area. Don't attack anybody. Just start running drills. Let's just act like it's ours because we think it's ours. We're claiming it to be ours. So just go run a bunch of drills in this area and we'll see what happens. So the American military starts running drills in this territory, and the Mexican army is like, yo, you like just invaded us. So they start shooting at the Americans, and the Americans are like, whoa, these Mexicans are shooting at us like totally unprovoked. Now, obviously that was the goal to begin with. Polk sent American military troops into this disputed territory, hoping that Mexico would retaliate in some sort of a violent way. We can be like, hey man, we're just defending ourselves. And that's the beginning of the Mexican-American War. We tried to buy the land, they refused to sell it to us, and so we basically goaded them into a war with us, which we knew we were going to win. The war lasts for 2 years. You don't need to know any of the details of the war. Essentially, the American soldiers marched slowly but surely and invaded in different places, eventually showed up in Mexico City and was like, we won, give up. And the Mexicans were like, drats. So after 2 years in 1848, there's a treaty between the United States and Mexico called the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which is signed. And that treaty gives us all of the land that we were originally going to buy in the offer that we sent them, including, yes, California and Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. I don't know, probably like Utah or something. And that chunk of Texas that was disputed between the two. So this is a huge addition to the United States, right? So another huge chunk of land is being added. So we've already negotiated Oregon, which we didn't discuss in the lecture, but I mean, I alluded to it, but I don't have a whole slide on it or anything. We've already negotiated Oregon out. We've already added Texas, and now we're adding all the land between Texas and California, including California. So Polk followed through on all three of those things, right? When he ran, he said, I'll get you this, I'll get you this, I'll get you this. He got all of those things. He followed through on all of his promises. By the way, James K. Polk, I can't remember what the fourth thing was, but he basically ran for president, said, I'm going to do these 4 things, achieved all 4 of those things in his first term, decided not to run for a second term, and then died like 3 months after his second term ended, which I think is probably the way that it should always be, right? Like for all presidents, they should be like, hey man, I'm gonna be president for 4 years, I'll accomplish these 4 things, and then when I'm done, I'll just like die and you don't have to hear from me again. I think that'd be a pretty good way to go. So Polk, you know, he doesn't stand out as being one of the greatest presidents of all time. And, you know, depending on how you think about the greatness of presidents, like just stealing land from people and starting wars and doing all that other stuff, right? It's kind of tricky. But he said he's going to do 4 things. He did 4 things. He did it in 1 term, didn't run for re-election, and then died. So I don't know. It's pretty efficient anyway. Okay, so now we've added all of this land, right? But adding all this land is going to bring us to the major problem of this chapter, which takes us to the next chapter, which is that all of this new land is going to bring the same question that we've been trying to dance around and avoid for a little while, which is slave or free. So before the Mexican-American War even ends, I believe it's a senator, it might be a congressman, I can't remember what state he's from, but it's definitely a northern state. So sorry, that was a lot of like fuzzy information, but it's someone in the government who's from a northern state who's against the expansion of slavery, whose last name is Wilmot. He created something called the Wilmot Proviso. And basically the Wilmot Proviso was a thing that he tried to get passed through Congress that said any territory from the Republic of Mexico by the United States by virtue of any treaty which may have been negotiated between them, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist in any part of said territory. So let's translate that to 2020 English. It says, if we win the war with Mexico and we take land from them, let's all agree right now that we're not going to allow slavery in that land. No slavery, right? So of course, all of the Northerners are like, yep, sounds pretty good to me. And all the Southerners are like, nah, bro, we're not going along with that. So it doesn't pass. It doesn't pass. Wilmot Proviso does not pass. But the fact that it was even put forth and voted upon and looked at and discussed tells you where we're going. It tells you what the problem is. It tells you that this is going to be an issue. That Missouri was clearly not the end of it. When everybody's like, well, the Missouri Compromise is certainly the end of that question. We solved all of our problems. Missouri slave, Maine free, everything else is settled. No. Because Western expansion is going to keep adding chunks of land, and every chunk of land we add is the same question. And even if you try to get that question answered before the land is even added, like David Wilmot did, he tried to get this question answered before the war even ended, and people were like, nah, bro, we're not going along with that. We're going to have to fight over this. So this whole chunk of land that was added, this whole blue area, we don't know, is that slave, is it free? We're going to have to fight over it. We're going to have to figure it out. And that fight is going to cause more of a rift between North and South. It's going to cause more of that divide between North and South. This whole question, expansion plus slavery equals civil war. This is what's going on right here. When this war was going on, there were some people who were very famously against it. One person who was very famously against it was Abraham Lincoln. Of course, at that time, nobody gave 2 craps about who Abraham Lincoln was, so it didn't really matter. But another person who was very strongly against it was Henry David Thoreau. That name doesn't ring a bell, I'll remind you, he was one of the transcendentalist writers that we talked about. And he very specifically said, this Mexican war, I'm paraphrasing, but this Mexican war is going to be the poison that kills the United States. He foresaw what would happen. He said, we're going to win the war, we're going to get this land, and it's going to create this huge fight between slave and free that will kill our country because we don't know how to answer that question. So you see all these things that are kind of bubbling up as a result of this expansion, as a result of the Mexican-American War. When I was in college, I had to write an essay that basically was like, if the Mexican-American War did not happen, would the Civil War have happened, right? And there's a lot of things to suggest that it probably wouldn't have, or at least didn't happen when it did. It's kind of like if the 7 Years' War didn't happen, would the American Revolution have happened? Maybe, maybe not, but certainly not when it did. It's the same thing. If the Mexican-American War didn't happen, would the Civil War have happened? Maybe, maybe not, but probably not when it did. It really is kind of this thing that's going to set off all of these kind of like dominoes that will fall and get us toward that spot. So it brings us to the election of 1848, and now in the election of 1844, I told you was all about Western expansion. The election of 1848 is all about slavery, and really these are just kind of two, like I said, this is the equation, right? This is the arithmetic. Western expansion, which is what 1844 was all about, plus slavery, which is what 1848 is about. But it's not just slavery, it's slavery and Western expansion. So Polk was like, let's go get a bunch of land. And now he's like, I'm not going to be president anymore now in 1848. Everybody's like, well, now we got to deal with the fallout of that and the consequences of that. So there's going to be basically three main people who run for president in 1848. Our old friend Martin Van Buren, who has already been president, right? He was the little magician that kind of created modern politics in the 1820s. He helped Andrew Jackson get elected in the 1820s and 1830s. He was in Andrew Jackson's administration. He was handpicked by Andrew Jackson to become elected president in 1836 and lost the election of 1840. Now in 1848, he's like, hey guys, want to give me another shot? I've completely changed everything I stand for and believe in, right? So this guy now has left the Democratic Party, has become one of the founding members of a brand new party called the Free Soil Party, which is a party that is fully dedicated to not allowing any slavery in any new land. That's their entire platform. So that's where we are in politics now, that it really kind of surrounds, everything kind of surrounds itself around one major question. And it's, what do you think about slavery, right? It's like really the only issue. And so the Free Soil Party is pretty clear. All new land added should be free, should not be slave. That's their belief, okay? So he's going to run for president, and he will not win. Another guy's going to run for president. This guy's going to be the Democrats. Remember, the Democratic Party is theoretically, supposedly, the party of Andrew Jackson, the party of small government, the party that is pro-agriculture. That's generally a Southern party, but this dude is from Michigan. So the Democratic Party at this point is still a national party. You can be from the North and be a Democrat. You can be from the South and be a Democrat. But the general ideology of the Democrats are the old Jeffersonian Southern beliefs. So he's pushing this new idea called popular sovereignty, or what's the other term that's in the book? Oh no, I just drew out of my mind. I have my book right here. Squatters' sovereignty, I think that's what it is. Squatter sovereignty. Oh, should just pause the video, but I'm not going to. I'm going to make you suffer through this with me. Haha, squatter sovereignty, I was right. So it's also known as squatter sovereignty, popular sovereignty. And this is an interesting idea. It says, okay, every time we add a new territory, let's just put everything on the table. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Every time we add a new territory, the country is going to be at each other's throats, because half of the country is going to say slave, slave, slave. The other half of the country is going to say free, free, free. Whichever way it goes, everybody's going to be, half the country is going to be pissed, and it's going to just rip us apart. So his idea was, hey man, hey, let's just let the state decide. Let's just take it out of Congress's hands. So this doesn't have to destroy Congress every time. So when state X says, hey, I'd like to be a new state, say, cool, everybody who lives there, vote. And when you guys vote and tell us we're going to be slave or free, you let us know. Let you guys figure it out. So it's a pretty clever way to be like, let's not have Congress just at war with ourselves every single time a new state wants to come in. Let's just let those people decide they're going to be slave or free, and then whatever they vote, we'll accept it. So he was pushing this Democrat, Lewis Cass was pushing this idea of popular sovereignty, also known as squatter sovereignty. And that idea, that candidate also did not win. The winning candidate was a dude named Zachary Taylor, who was the general from the Mexican-American War that Lewis Polk was like, hey man, why don't you guys just go kind of like tiptoe over the line, run a couple drills and see if we can get a war started. So Zachary Taylor was the general that took those orders from Polk, went in there and basically started the Mexican-American War. So he is a hero from the Mexican-American War. He was a general from the Mexican-American War that became popular. His nickname was Old Rough and Ready. No reason for you to know that. Just thought you might want to. It's kind of a weird nickname, Old Rough and Ready. But anyway, so he's going to win the election. Now, he's a Whig. Now, this is when the political parties are all weird. The Whigs are supposed to be kind of the northern elite party, the party of anti-big government, the party of manufacturing, and so on and so forth. But this dude is from Louisiana, and he is a slave owner. But he's not a huge proponent of expanding slavery, right? So he's kind of seen as this guy who is, yes, he's a slave owner, so he's going to have the Southerner perspective, but he's also not this radical, like, there's a lot of Southerners who are like in the Mexican-American War, they were like, now that we've won the war, let's take even more land. They want to take over, like, we took a third of Mexico's land in the Mexican-American War. There were some Southerners who were like, let's take more land. Some Southerners were like, well, let's invade Cuba now. Let's invade other Caribbean countries. Like, they were like super intense on expanding slavery. So this guy was like, hey man, like, I own slaves. I got the whole Southern perspective, so Southerners like me, but I'm not some like radical person that wants to invade every place to be able to expand slavery. So people like Zachary Taylor, he seemed like a pretty like mellow dude. He's not going to rock the boat, and he won the election. So he's going to be the next president of the United States, Zachary Taylor. There's nothing about his presidency that's going to stand out or be very monumental. So we don't need to really know much about that or even him, but just that in 1848, the different perspectives on slavery kind of run the gamut in each of the candidates. And this is where we end up in 1848. All right. Now, this is something that, of course, all of you know already, but in 1849, something huge happens on the west coast of North America, which is that gold is discovered just outside of modern day Sacramento. And then everyone says, whoa, there's probably a lot more of that. And everybody starts coming to California around the Sacramento area to look for gold. So we experience a gold rush. It's not the only gold rush that happens in American history. It's just the most famous gold rush. And it happens in 1849. And in case you guys didn't know, which I'm sure you did, but if you didn't, this is why the San Francisco football team, which doesn't play in San Francisco anymore, but anyway, the San Francisco football team is called the 49ers because they're named after the gold rush. Just like the Philadelphia basketball team is named the 76ers because Philadelphia was where the United States was, the Declaration of Independence was written in 1776. Again, besides the point. So in 1849, there's gold discovered. Everybody's like, oh, damn, we got to get to California. So people from all over the world rush to California. Of course, also, we always have to include the crying native because this is bad news for the natives who live there, of course. But that's not really a big part of the story. Just wanted to remind you that natives are still getting screwed over. So tons of people from all over the world and from all over the United States are all coming to California like whoosh. Now, quick timeout, quick side note on how much this must suck for Mexico, because Mexico has controlled this land for a very long time. And in 1848, after 2 years of fighting, they signed over this treaty and said, fine, you can have it. And within a year, gold is discovered. That's got to hurt, right? That's like, let's say you like owned a house for like 25 years. And then you sold that house, and then like someone else lived there for like 3 weeks. And they're like, hey, did you guys know that there's a basement? And in that basement, there's a briefcase with like $450 million in cash. And you're like, what? Because now the new people get to have it because it's their house. You're like, I can't believe we never went to the basement in 25 years. This is kind of what it must feel like for Mexico, which is a big bummer. But anyway, that's not, again, really super relevant, but it is a bummer. Anyway, so America is like, yo, usually we got to wait until like the population gets really high before we consider a place to be like, apply for statehood. But like California, things are about to start popping off because hell, people are going to go there because of this gold rush thing. So we got to expedite the whole statehood thing. Okay. So that's why we care about the gold rush right now, is because it's going to expedite statehood. So in 1850, California is going to be added as a state to the United States. And it happened a lot quicker than it really would have normally because of the gold, right? And so in 1850, California is going to be added as a free state. right? Now, this is going to be a big problem because all of the pro-slavery Southern state people are going to be like, whoa, 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 hold on. Why is it a free state? Like, what's going on here? Like, what are we doing? Like, we don't have any like previously agreed upon idea about what this territory should be. This whole chunk of land that we got from Mexico in the Mexican American War, Dave Wilmot, the Wilmot Proviso was like, should we say it's all free? And then like all the Southerners were like, no. So that didn't pass. So why are we just assuming it should be free? They applied as a free state, but like still, like we should talk about this as a problem. So California coming in as a free state is going to cause a problem, just like Texas coming in as a slave state caused a problem. Just like Missouri coming in as a slave state caused a problem, because whoever comes in as a state is going to cause a problem. Half of the country's not going to be happy about it. So what does this all lead to? It leads to another compromise. So here's the deal. Let's talk about the compromise of 1850. But in order to understand the compromise of 1850, wait, hold on. Nope. Okay. In order to understand the compromise of 1850, we have to go back to the compromise of 1820. So if you remember the compromise of 1820, also known as the Missouri Compromise, okay, I really should have put a map of that in here. Anyway, Missouri came in as a slave state. This is 1820 Missouri Compromise. Maine came in as a free state. We kept it even, okay? And then at that point, the western boundary of the United States was here. Right here. This is the western boundary. Texas wasn't part of the United States. None of these territories were the United States. It was just Louisiana territory. So all this kind of like tan part down to through here. So we said in the compromise of 1820, Missouri Compromise, Missouri would be slave, Maine would be free, everything above this line would be free, everything below this line would be slave. So now that we've added all of this land, the fundamental question becomes, does the Missouri Compromise applied to the land that we acquired in the Mexican-American War? So all the Southerners will say, yes, it does. Everything below this line is supposed to be slave. So just extend that line all the way to the coast. And all of this territory, including the southern part of California, should all be slave territory. So that's the Southern argument. The Northern argument, the free soil argument, right, says no. That line only applied to the Louisiana territory, and anything that comes in, it's a whole new world, right? It's a brand new thing. We can figure it out state by state. So now we have this fight between North and South again, between the free soil people and the pro-slave people. The pro-slave people say we should apply the compromise of 1820 Missouri Compromise all the way across, even in this new land. And the free soil people say, no, it should only apply to the territory that was in there. So now we have this knockdown, drag out fight again between northern states and southern states, between free soil and pro-slave. And again, it looks like the country is going to be torn apart, just like we saw in 1820, just like we saw with Texas, just like we saw in all these other places. And so they're going to come up with yet another compromise. So here's the compromise that we're going to deal with. We will say the North gets California. Okay, so that's going to be a free state. That's free. So that's a win for the free soilers. The South will get a stricter fugitive slave law because there's more and more slaves who are escaping to the North, and the federal government will give you more power in sending slave catchers up to the North to be able to bring your slaves back down to the South, which is a win for the South. Then, in order to avoid this problem ever again, we will apply popular sovereignty or squatter sovereignty to the rest of the land that we got in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. This area that we're calling the Utah Territory, which includes modern day Nevada, Utah, and parts of Colorado, and modern day, and the New Mexico Territory, which includes modern day parts of Nevada, Arizona, and New Mexico. But anyway, these two big chunks of land, it's going to be popular sovereignty so that, again, take it out of Congress's hands. This is what Lewis Cass said, even though he didn't win the election. Take it out of Congress's hands and let those states figure it out when they apply for statehood. They can vote and then they'll let us know. So we'll do popular sovereignty right there. We'll let them decide. So theoretically, everybody wins. The North gets California as a free state. The South gets a stricter fugitive slave law, and then the rest of the territory will be decided that way. Okay. Now, here's an analogy I want to throw at you real quick because you know I love my analogies. This whole question of slavery in the new territories, right? Imagine that there's this giant reservoir and there's a dam that's holding back all of this water, right? Tons of water. And just downstream, there's a little village called the United States of America, right? And there's a dam here that is protecting the United States from being flooded by this issue, right? That dam is the thing that's preventing this from happening. And there keeps being cracks in the dam, right? Now, the problem is the dam was not built correctly. The dam is structurally unsound because this question of whether we should be a country that has slavery or doesn't have slavery was something that should have been theoretically solved when the country was founded. But the founding fathers knew that was a poison pill that would destroy this before we even got started. So they punted the ball, they kicked it down the road. So we'll let future generations figure that out. Well, now future generations are also punting the ball. They're not structurally fixing this thing. The structural issues in this dam are starting to reveal themselves. All these cracks start popping up because the structural construction of this dam was not sound. Every one of these compromises is not addressing those problems. It's getting a little bit of spackle and filling in the crack. Oop, new crack, spackle it up. Oop, new crack, spackle it up. Oop, new crack, spackle it up. Like, that's not actually going to fix the problem. Every one of these compromises, they're like, cool guys, we solved the problem. Let's go get donuts and celebrate. Like, no, like Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, any of the other compromises that we've seen happen, or other things where they've kind of just like skirted around the question or kind of like said, well, don't worry about that right now, worry about it later on. The structural construction of the dam is broken. It's not going to work. It's unstable. It's unsound. And we have to fix the dam. We have to answer this question once and for all. But we're just avoiding it by putting a little bit of spackle in the crack here, a little bit of spackle in the crack there, and then hoping that's going to do it. And it's not. These compromises aren't going to work. And the fact is, every one of these compromises just creates a new problem that has to be solved by a future compromise. So the compromise of 1820, wait a minute, does that extend all the way to the Pacific, or does it end where the Louisiana Territory ends? We don't know. So that's going to force us to create another compromise in Compromise of 1850. Well, spoiler alert, saying that the rest of the territory is going to be decided by popular sovereignty or by squatter sovereignty, that's going to cause another problem that's going to have to lead to another solution in some capacity or some way to try to figure it out. So that's the Compromise of 1850, and that's where we're at. That brings us to part 3. Part 3 is called The End of the Second Party System. An alternative name for it, which I created, is called How All These Compromises Doomed America, which is what I was just alluding to. I got ahead of myself there. But remember, the second party system was created in 1820s when Andrew Jackson created the Democratic Party and the Whig Party was created as a reaction. The first party system was created in the 1780s when the Republicans and the Federalists were arguing over the Constitution, arguing over whether or not we should have a stronger federal government, weaker federal government. That ended in the 18 teens. We had the era of good feelings for about 15 years, a decade and a half. Then the second party system will start in 1828, and it will carry us through to the 1850s. In the 1850s, second party system will come crashing down at the same time that all of these compromises doom America. So part 3 is all about the end of the second party system, but all these compromises are just not going to actually solve our problems. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So the Compromise of 1850, it doesn't take long before the South realizes that the Compromise of 1850 actually was a pretty bad deal for them. Wait a minute. The Union gets California and we get like better fugitive slave laws. That doesn't seem equal. And it seems even less equal when none of the northern states actually abide by the harsher fugitive slave laws. Many people in the northern states strongly resent when slave catchers come up from the South to take runaway slaves back, right? And so there's a lot of people in the North, especially as abolitionism grows, who basically are actively hiding slaves, who, if like a slave catcher is discovered, like a mob of people will come and basically like throw them in jail or like beat the crap out of them and like ship them out of the community. Like there's a lot of people who are very defensive, not because well, we don't get into why, but they're very defensive against slave catchers coming up. So this new fugitive slave law, which already doesn't really compare with getting California as a free state, is not even really being enforced. And a lot of the northern states are like, well, sorry, sucker, like, we're not going to let you come up and do it. Here's a sign that was common at the time in a northern city, like, let's say you're in Philadelphia or something. It's like, as soon as word got out that slave catcher was in town, they would basically blast it out and be like, hey, everybody, keep your eye out. Like, there's slave hunters here. Like, don't let them catch you. Like, go ahead and hide, whatever, that kind of stuff. Also, during this time period, we've already talked about abolitionism is on the rise. Uncle Tom's Cabin, which we've already talked about, is the hottest selling book in America at the time. A bunch of Northerners are having their eyes open to the horrors of slavery. A bunch of Southerners are horribly offended by Uncle Tom's Cabin because they think it paints them in a very bad light, because it tells the truth about what they're doing. And so the tensions between North and South are getting even more tense, right? The tension is rising, like this, reaching this boiling point between North and South. And every time there's this new issue way out west about a new state being added or not, it just creates more tension between those two sides, between North and South. Oh, here we go. Now I'm reviewing the Compromise 1820. I should have looked at these slides before I did this lecture. Why isn't this map in earlier? Anyway, I showed you this earlier. Okay, so now I'm showing you again. Oh, I know why. Okay, so remember, in 1820, Missouri wanted to come in as a slave state. That would throw off the balance between slave and free states. So we said Missouri will come in as slave, Maine will come in as free. All the territory up here will be free. All the territory down here will be slave. And at that point, they were very proud of themselves for thinking they had solved the problem, but it was just a little bit of spackle. They didn't really solve the problem. And then I'm guessing the next slide is going to be the Compromise of 1850. Watch. Let's see. It's not. Damn it. Anyway, then remember in the Compromise 1850, I'll go back a few in case you forgot. We said California will become free. The North gets a fugitive slave law, but what's important here is that we said all of this land is going to be decided by popular sovereignty. So that brings us to 1854, and things are going to get tricky. So at this point in American history, and we'll talk about this in a little more detail at another time, but for now, we'll briefly cover it. There's most of the American population. If you look at it, here's where all the states are, right? Look at all these states. Big fat territory, and then another state. Remember, when people are moving westward, they're basically making it here, and then Great Plains, Rocky Mountains, nah. Great Basin, ugh. Sierra Mountains, California, yeah, and Oregon, right? So people were just kind of leapfrogging this whole part, coming over here, coming over here. So the population over here is growing pretty rapidly. The population over here is pretty well settled. We have this big old chunk in between. So ironically, because we know what's going to happen, there's this huge concern about the country splitting between East and West, that this part of the country would split off and become its own country, whatever. So now, and the reason, of course, is ironic because we know that's actually going to happen between North and South, not between East and West, right? Okay, anyway, but that was a huge concern at the time. So there's a huge push for there to be a construction of a transcontinental railroad, a railroad that connects California and Oregon too, but California to the East Coast. Just like a couple decades back, we had to connect this region of the United States to the East Coast to kind of like bring it in economically. We want to connect this region of the United States. All right. So there's a senator from Illinois, this dude named Stephen Douglas, who's going to be an important part of our story, even beyond this story, this part too. But he's a senator from Illinois. Now, he really wants the Transcontinental Railroad because everybody knows the Transcontinental Railroad is going to happen. The question is where, right? There's a lot of different routes it could take. So he really wants to go through Illinois, right? Because he's a senator from Illinois, and having the railroad go through Illinois would be good for Illinois and bring Illinois a lot of money. But if it goes through Illinois, then it would also have to go through the Kansas and Nebraska territories, right? It has to go through these territories and then also out here to get to California. So he wants to expedite Kansas and Nebraska being added as states, just like we expedited California becoming a state. Okay, the population's not there yet, but we want them to become states because it'd be easier to build the train through there, right? So now the question is going to be, as always, okay, so if Kansas and Nebraska are going to become states, free or slave? Now, we should already know the answer to that question, right? we should already know if it's going to be slave or free, because in 1820, they compromised 1820 said all this territory is going to be free. Everything down here is slave, everything above here is free. That was decided in 1820. It's 34 years later. This decision has been made a long time ago, right? So it should be free. But the South says, no, 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 no. The compromise of 1850, sorry, I should have this map closer, replaced the compromise of 1820. And what the South is claiming is that the compromise of 1850 replaced the compromise of 1820, and that all territory should be decided by popular sovereignty. So they're saying, yes, in 1820, we said this is all free. But in 1850, we replaced that and said that all territory is popular sovereignty. And the North says, no, 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 no. Hold on a second. The compromise of 1820 stands. This is free. Compromise of 1850 said this is popular sovereignty. And the South said, 50 replaced 20 and said everything was popular sovereignty. The South is going to win this argument because Stephen Douglas, the senator from Illinois, who wants these areas to become states, decides he wants to do it based on popular sovereignty. So now Kansas and Nebraska are applying for statehood, and they're basing it on popular sovereignty, and the North is irate because they're like, whoa, hold on a second. We decided 34 years ago that this territory is supposed to be free, and now you're telling us we're going to do popular sovereignty, and it could be a slave state? No way, dude. So yet again, here we go, another crack in the dam, right? Another fight between North and South, another fight between free soil and slave. Here we go again. The structural issue from the original construction of this dam, again being a problem. And we're fighting over stuff that theoretically we thought we already solved. So this is what's causing the Civil War. Over and over and over again, having the same fight, right? If any relationship you're in, any marriage you're in or something like that, if you're having the same damn fight for 20 years and you never get past that same fight, that's not a good sign, man, right? That's not a good sign. You got to work through those problems. And America is not figuring this out. So now we've decided that Kansas and Nebraska are going to be decided by popular sovereignty. And this brings us to the first time a state comes in based on popular sovereignty. And it's going to be Kansas. Kansas is going to be the very first state that's going to use popular sovereignty, or what is also known as squatter sovereignty, to say, hey, cool, like we want to come in as a free state. Or sorry, we want to come in as a state and we're going to vote. We don't know what it's going to be, free or slave. We're going to come in and we're going to vote to see what it's going to be. And it is going to be a disaster. It's going to be an absolute train wreck of a situation. Popular sovereignty, which everybody thought was, oh man, it's the solution. Congress doesn't have to fight over this anymore. It's going to be the easiest way. Just let the people in that state vote and we'll let them do it. Well, it's already causing a problem, number one, because the North thinks this should be free and not even be decided by popular sovereignty. But secondarily, popular sovereignty or squatter sovereignty is going to be a disaster. So let's talk about why. Well, let me take a step back because this is kind of secondary. So Kansas right here is going to apply for statehood, right? So all the people in Kansas will vote whether they want to be slave or free. Now, here's the deal. Missouri, we know, is a slave state. When the election happens, hell of people from Missouri, boop, hop over the state line and vote for Kansas to become a slave state. So all these pro-slave people are going to sneak into Kansas and vote illegally. They're not supposed to do that. Only people who live in Kansas are supposed to vote. But it's the 18 whatevers, and it's really hard to keep track of who lives where and what the vote is and all this other stuff. So a whole bunch of people from Missouri come in and vote and say, yeah, we vote for it to be a slave state. So when all the votes are counted, there are more votes for it to be a slave state. So under popular sovereignty, now Kansas is a slave state. But all the free soil people say, no, 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 no. This is a BS election. We're not going to, this is total election fraud. We're not going to stand for it. All these people from Missouri came in and voted illegally. So that's not legit. It's actually a free state. So in Kansas, when Kansas is formed, all of a sudden there's going to be a whole group of people who say it's a slave state. They're going to set up a government. They're going to elect a governor. They're going to elect members of the legislature. They're going to have a capital. And all the free soil people are going to say, no, 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 it's a free state. They're going to create a government, elect a governor, elect the legislature. And there are two governments that exist at the same time that both claim to be the rightful kind of legitimate government of Kansas. It doesn't take long before people start getting angry and shooting at each other. And it leads to something called Bleeding Kansas. And Bleeding Kansas is essentially going to be a precursor to the Civil War, right? This is 1854 going into 1855, 56. And we're 5 years away from the Civil War starting, right? So this political cartoon basically is kind of showcases what like certain people thought, like claim was going on. This is Kansas, right? And like the slavery people are shoving all these votes and forcing Kansas to take what they want to take. This is getting intense, right? Like I said, it's like a legit civil war. People are shooting, killing. It's like a full blown kind of like, a violent situation. But go back to Washington, D.C. On the floor of the Senate, one guy, dude named Charles Sumner from Massachusetts, is a huge anti-slavery advocate, and he's giving a speech on the floor of the Senate about Bleeding Kansas and about saying this was a fraud, they stole the election, this is uncalled for, blah, blah, blah. In the middle of his speech, another senator, I think from South Carolina, but I'm not sure, 100% sure, gets up and starts beating Charles Sumner with his cane. I think it's Charles Sumner, but don't quote me on that. But anyway, starts beating this northern senator with a cane, beating him, boom, 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 beat him so hard he gave him brain damage. And he couldn't serve in the Senate for like years after that because it took him a long time to get his cognitive function back because he gave him brain damage. He beat him so bad with his cane. This is how crazy stuff getting. There's a full-blown civil war happening in Kansas. On the floor of the Senate, Southern senators are beating Northern senators who are giving a speech with a cane, beating them nearly to death. I mean, it's out of control. And this is, again, we're 4 or 5 years away from a full-blown civil war. Nobody knows that yet, but I mean, if you're paying attention, you probably can see the writing on the wall. Right? So all of these, this is the thing, the temperature just keeps rising, keep rising, right? 1820 led to 1850, 1850 led to 1854. Like all these things keep building on each other. And that, again, the structural problem with the dam is not being fixed by a little bit of sparkle here, a little bit of sparkle there. You can see things are unraveling pretty damn quickly. Okay, that brings us to the elections of 1852 and 1856. Really, the elections of 1852, 1854, and 1856. And why this slide is basically the end of the second party system slide. Like that was the name of this section, right? Go back. Man, I'm probably on like hour 12 of this lecture. Sorry, there's a lot going on. Hopefully you're fast forwarding here. You probably stopped watching a long time ago, but if you're still with me, thanks. Anyway, so they say, the textbook says that part 3 is the end of the second party system. I say it's how all these compromises doomed America. So far we've been talking about how all these compromises doomed America, but this slide is basically the end of the second party system. Because remember, it's the Whigs versus the Democrats, and both are somewhat national parties. But in 1852, the Whigs will split between Northern Whigs and Southern Whigs. And that's basically going to kill the Whig Party because all the Southern Whigs basically just join the Democrat Party, and all of the Northern Whigs basically just kind of start floating around as free agents, and they don't really know what to do because there's not really another party for them to join yet. So in 1852, in that election, it doesn't matter who ran or who won for president. We don't care. But what matters is that the Whigs will split between Northern Whigs, Southern Whigs, and Southern Whigs will just be absorbed by the Democrat Party, okay? Then in 1854, when the Kansas and Nebraska thing goes down, this is going to divide the Democrats because the Northern Democrats are going to support. Let's see what happens. Now I'm a little confused. But anyway, it's going to, fundamentally what you need to understand is that it's this question of slavery, right? And people in the North more and more just going to identify as an anti-slavery, pro-free soil ideology. And so if you're a Northern Democrat, the more the Democratic Party goes harder and harder for slavery, the more you're going to be turned off by it. So that's what it is. A lot of the Northern Democrats were turned off by the Kansas-Nebraska Act thing because they were like, man, this is a bunch of BS. Like that was supposed to be free soil. You guys switched it to popular sovereignty, and then you cheated in that election for it to become a slave state. Man, that's a bunch of BS. So a lot of the Northern Democrats say, I don't even part of the Democratic Party anymore. So the Northern Whigs and the Northern Democrats have kind of both broken off from the their previous party they belonged to. The Southern Whigs and the Southern Democrats basically just become an even bigger Democrat party. And by the time we get to the election of 1856, a brand new political party will have formed, which is called the Republican Party. Now, this Republican Party has no connection with the previous Republican Party. The Jeffersonian Republicans that existed in the 1790s and early 1800s is not at all connected with this brand new political party that's going to be created in the 1850s. So this brand new Republican Party, as you can see right here, is basically created in response to the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which so many people were so offended by. Because again, it was supposed to be free territory, they changed it to popular sovereignty, and then they cheated in the election to win that election. So it's made up of old Northern Whigs, who now are, the Whig Party is basically gone and dead, old Northern Democrats who have abandoned the Democrat Party, Free Soilers, because that was a brand new political party that existed, but it was kind of a small political party, and another political party called the Know Nothings, which we don't really need to know anything about right now. Get it? We don't need to know anything because they're the Know Nothings. Anyway, okay. So it's basically a Northern party, and they become the Republican Party. And the fundamental organizing principle of the Republican Party is free soil. So they're basically the Free Soil Party, but they've globbed all of these groups together, kind of this Frankenstein party of all these Northerners that say, we support free soil. The Southern Party says we support the expansion of slavery. Let's be clear about something, though. Very, very clear. The Republican Party is not an abolitionist party. Abolitionism is growing, it's popular, but the Republican Party is not an abolitionist party. They do not support the abolition of slavery. They support free soil in the territory. So this isn't about abolishing slavery where it exists. It's about not allowing slavery to expand anywhere else. So the Republican Party is a free soil party. All new territory needs to be free. The Democrat Party is a pro-slavery party. They want to expand slavery as much as possible. And this is where we find ourselves in the 1850s with the two parties, by the way, that we continue to have today. We will not see any more new parties come and go, any significant parties anyway. We will see the beliefs of these two parties change and evolve over time. But the Democrat Party, the one that we have today, was created in 1828 by Andrew Jackson. And the Republican Party, the one that we have today, was created by a whole bunch of different people who came together in the 1850s to be a free soil party, okay? So that's where we are, and that's why it is the death of the second party system, because the Whigs are gone, and now we got to this part where it's very regional. We have the Northern, basically the Northern Party, and you can see here in the election of 1856, all the blue states are the Republicans. So this is the Northern Party, this is the Republicans, and the Southern Party is the Democrats. That's the Southern, right? So these guys are the pro-slavery, blah, 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 and these guys are the these guys are the Free Soilers. That's where we find ourselves in 1856. Okay. Very important Supreme Court case happens at this time period too, which takes all of these things we've been talking about. So imagine everything we've been talking about, all of the things we've been talking about, whether it's the Missouri Compromise in 1820, whether it's Texas being annexed and that being a slave state, whatever, whether it's the Compromise in 1850, whether it's Kansas, Nebraska, squatter sovereignty, popular sovereignty, or even going back to the Northwest Ordinance from the Articles of Confederation. Everything that's been decided about slavery throughout American history so far, imagine each one of those is a very delicate, like Lego set that has been placed on the table, right? So here's this thing about slavery that we've decided, here's this thing about slavery we've decided, here's this thing, it's all been placed on the table, very nice and neat, very delicate and fragile. Then, I think it's 1856, Dred Scott, I'm not 100% sure. Again, you could probably look it up, but I'm looking at my book right now. I think it's 1856, 1857. Okay. So in 1857, a Supreme Court case is going to come and take that table with all of those delicate little Lego pieces that anything that has ever had to do with slavery, any decision that's been made, anything that designated a certain area as slave or not slave or whatever, the Supreme Court case is going to come around, take that table and flip it over, and all the Lego pieces are going to fly everywhere. It's going to turn everything upside down. It's called the Dred Scott Supreme Court case, Dred Scott versus Sandford, okay? So here's the argument in Dred Scott. There was a slave. His owner took him up north temporarily. They lived there for a while. I'm not sure how long. They lived there up north for a while his owner did some work, and then he took him back down south. Well, the slave was like, while they were up north, was like, well, wait a minute, I live in the north, and there's no slavery up here. So he sued for his freedom and said, hey, man, I should be free. I live in the north. So this case is going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Now, this is where the ghost of Andrew Jackson is still alive and kicking. Because remember, Andrew Jackson appointed Chief Justice Robert Taney. So just like John Marshall hung around for a few decades after the Federalists left and upheld all of the things the Federalists stood for, Chief Justice John Taney is going to hang around quite a while after Andrew Jackson's gone, uphold all the things that Andrew Jackson stands for, including being very pro-slavery. Andrew Jackson owned slaves. Chief Justice Robert Taney owned slaves. And so the decision that's going to be made by the Supreme Court is going to be monumental. First of all, he says he dismisses the case. So the actual details of the case are not super important. He dismisses the case and he says, look, you don't have the right to sue in the Supreme Court because Black people are not citizens of the United States, especially slaves, but Black people in general, right? So if you're a slave, you're a Black person, you're not a citizen of the United States, you don't have the right to sue. So I'm even going to hear your case. But then he uses it as an opportunity. Chief Justice Robert Taney and the rest of the Supreme Court uses an opportunity to just address the whole question of slavery in general. The entire country has been trying to figure this out. Congress has been figuring it out. The president's trying to figure it out. All these states have been trying to figure it out. Everybody's been working on this thing for decades. And the Supreme Court says, we'll weigh in. And so what they say is not only do Black people not have the right to sue, but Congress doesn't have the right to abolish slavery anywhere. Therefore, any decision that's ever been made by Congress about slavery is now null and void. This goes all the way back to the Northwest Ordinance from the Articles of Confederation and everything that's happened ever since. So his whole thing, and remember, Andrew Jackson's a Jeffersonian. These are states' rights people. Robert Taney is a Jacksonian, states' rights. So he said, if a state has abolished slavery, if New York has abolished slavery, fine. But anywhere Congress abolished slavery, it said this whole territory is free. That doesn't count. So again, that just flipped everything on its head and basically said all of these places where slavery has been outlawed, it's now wide open. And that infuriates the North. It's met with a great celebration in the South. Takes this wedge that's dividing North and South, which has been made even greater by growing abolitionism and by the popularity of Uncle Tom's Cabin and by the fugitive slave law and by the refusal to actually abide by the fugitive slave law and by all these different compromises. This wedge has been driving North and South further and further. This is going to really rip North and South apart in a significantly major way. So the vitriol and the mistrust and the animosity between North and South is at a fever pitch in the aftermath of this Supreme Court case. And so the next presidential election in 1860 is going to be a wild one. And that's the one where Abraham Lincoln's going to get elected. And so part 4, Abraham Lincoln gets elected in 1860. But before we get there, well, this is basically it. But I'm not going to do part 4 because this has already gone on for a very, very long time. And we will circle back around to this at the beginning of chapter, we're in chapter 3, and we'll circle back around to this at the beginning of chapter 14. So don't worry about part 4. It's just this one slide. It's the election of 1860, which I'll just pick up in the next one because I'm really worried about how long this is going to say it is when I hit stop recording. So if you made it to the end, God bless you. I'm proud of you. You're amazing. Hopefully you found this to be somewhat entertaining and informative. And I hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving break. That's chapter 13.